Red Crescent is saying that search teams have reached the wreckage of the helicopter carrying the Iranian president. President Ebrahim Raisi and the foreign minister have been reported to be on board this helicopter when it wound down in East Azerbaijan. Dense fog and heavy rain had been hampering search efforts. The condition of those on board hasn't been confirmed, but obviously the fears expressed in Iran right now for their leader are very severe indeed. Let's get some reaction. I'm joined by Senior Fellow at ASPI, Mark Watson. What do you make of this story, a big news story in terms of the Middle East?
It's a very concerning story, actually, Kieran. At the moment, all we know is there's been apparently an aircraft that's gone down in heavy weather. In the early hours and early days, I think we always need to just hit a pause a little bit till we gather some more facts. But Iranian state media is saying that it's come down in heavy weather. They're not yet suggesting any foreign influence in this, but there's still plenty of time for that narrative to change. And if that does happen, then we've got a serious issue.
It did happen at a time of bad weather, but when you're talking about the death or apparent death of two senior figures within the Iranian regime, it leads to questions.
There will absolutely be questions. I mean, it was only last month that Israel put a missile into an Iranian consulate, and then that was followed up with the largest ever drone raid conducted by Iran targeting targets inside Israel. And that was followed up in terms with missiles from Israel into Iran. So this has already been, on some level, a shooting war. Anything that suggested Israeli involvement in this, and I hasten to add, there's nothing at the moment that suggests that, but if that narrative develops, that is a very dangerous development indeed.
Yeah, it would be. Another development today as we turn our attention to Taiwan, the inauguration of its new president. What are the implications of a leadership change? And also Australian parliamentarians there in a bipartisan show of support for the new president of Taiwan.
Well, Dr. Lai, that's coming into office, would be seen in Beijing as someone more sympathetic to the separatist, as they would see it, cause in Taiwan. A visit by an Australian parliamentary delegation would always be sensitive for China. It was not that long ago, 2 years ago, Nancy Pelosi led a congressional delegation to Taiwan that led to a whole range of very serious responses from the government in Beijing. Now, this is very different. I mean, this is a much lower level delegation. They appear to be trying to keep it on the down low, provided they don't make any provocative statements about the relationship between Taiwan and China. I think China can live with this.
And the new president, any great concern around this flashpoint?
Look, as I say, anything in Beijing that is interpreted as separatism in Taiwan escalates the heat in that relationship. I think, as I say, Beijing will see Dr. Lai as being more sympathetic to that separatist cause, as Beijing would view it.
So they'll be watching it closely.
They'll be watching it very closely, and hence why this is a sensitive visit by the Australian parliamentarians. But to date, the only statement I've seen out of China came out of the embassy here in Canberra. It was pretty modest by Chinese standards, just suggesting, hey, you wouldn't want to do anything to upset the improving relationship between China and Australia.
The week before this inauguration, we saw the No Limits partnership continue its next phase, that being Vladimir Putin paying a visit to Xi Jinping.
Yes, indeed. It's the latest instalment in this authoritarian bromance between these two leaders. And it really is a continuation of what they call the No Limits friendship or partnership. And it has benefits for both countries. There's no doubt it has strategic benefits. China is plugging gaps in the Russian economy, its industrial base that were created by Western sanctions. That doesn't mean it's shipping arms and munitions, but it does mean it's helping Russia get around those sanctions. And of course, now two-way trade is at its highest level ever. Russia's now the single largest source of crude oil for China. Big increase in LPG. Very significant.
China had previously tried to position itself as somewhat of a peacemaker, not just with Russia, Ukraine, but potentially in the Middle East as well. Where does that stand?
Look, I think China still sees itself in that way. And if there's one silver lining in this relationship, it is that if you recall, when Putin first suggested they could use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and since then, of course, they've run military exercises that involve tactical nuclear weapons. But when Putin first raised it, it was China that jumped in and said nobody should be talking about use of nuclear weapons. So if there is a silver lining, it's that he may be able to use some influence to try and at least put some limits on that Russian assault.
Mark Watson, Senior Fellow at ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Great to see you. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran.